Imagine kicking off one of the most ambitious sci-fi films of all time, only to discover you don't even have the legal right to make it. That's exactly how chaotic the production of War of the Worlds really was. Behind those terrifying Martian heat rays and city-crushing war machines was a story of lawsuits, near-fatal accidents, censorship battles, and desperate last-minute fixes that could have buried the movie before it ever reached theaters. This wasn't just a simple adaptation of H.G. Wells's classic novel. It was a roller coaster of blown budgets, impossible special effects, and risky stunts that nearly cooked the crew alive. So buckle up. These are 20 shocking, weird, and downright unbelievable facts about War of the Worlds that prove sometimes the real chaos happens behind the camera. Number 1. Paramount started filming without the legal rights. You'd think a giant studio would make absolutely sure they legally owned a story before spending millions filming it. Not Paramount. They were convinced their 1925 deal with the H.G. Wells estate gave them movie rights forever. No questions asked. But there was a massive catch nobody had bothered to check. That old contract only covered a silent film version. By the 1950s, sound films were the industry standard, which meant the entire production of War of the Worlds was basically illegal from day one. Imagine the panic. Cameras were already rolling. Actors were in full costume. Sets had been built. Money was being spent. And suddenly, 2 days into filming, lawyers realized the studio didn't even have the right kind of rights to make a talking picture. Production screeched to a halt. Paramount scrambled, cutting a new deal with the Wells estate as fast as humanly possible. Only then could they legally continue. One of the greatest sci-fi movies ever made started its life on shaky, almost criminal ground. If that negotiation had fallen apart, the entire project would have collapsed. Millions wasted, careers damaged, all because someone didn't read the fine print on a 30-year-old contract. Number 2. The Martian war machines were almost generic flying saucers. When people think of War of the Worlds today, they picture those eerie manta ray-shaped war machines gliding through smoke and destruction with their cobra-like heat ray necks. Iconic, unforgettable. But that design wasn't the original plan at all. At first, Paramount wanted flying saucers. The classic UFO shape you'd see plastered on every pulp magazine cover and tabloid headline. Simple, recognizable, easy to market. The problem? By the early 1950s, UFO hysteria was absolutely everywhere. News reports, conspiracy theories, supposed sightings, little green men dominated pop culture. The filmmakers worried the movie would look like just another cheap alien invasion flick, lost in a sea of identical stories. So they made a bold call: scrap the saucers entirely. Special effects legend Albert Nozaki went back to the drawing board and designed the sleek, curved war machines we know today. Part manta ray, part cobra, with those menacing snake-like necks capable of shooting deadly heat rays in any direction. It gave the film a completely unique identity that still feels alien and threatening decades later. One design decision separated War of the Worlds from disposable B-movies and turned it into something genuinely memorable. Number 3. The special effects were an absolute nightmare. The Martian war machines looked incredible in concept art. Bringing them to life nearly broke the entire crew. The models were suspended by visible wires, which wouldn't have been a problem except those wires kept reflecting the powerful studio lights like mirrors. No matter how the team adjusted angles or repositioned equipment, the wires ruined take after take. The models looked less like alien invaders and more like puppets dangling on strings. The solution they came up with was desperate and brilliant. Smear the wires with baby oil, then blast them with arc lights at specific angles to make them vanish on film. It worked, barely, but it forced the effects team to invent tricks on the fly, turning each battle scene into a high-stakes experiment where one wrong move could ruin hours of work. Every shot involving the war machines became a technical challenge that required precision, patience, and a lot of luck. The technology didn't exist to make this easy. They had to create it themselves, frame by painstaking frame. Number 4. The actors were nearly cooked alive. The Martians weren't the only ones bringing devastating heat. The set itself turned into a literal oven. To simulate the burning destruction caused by Martian weapons, the crew relied on gigantic carbon arc lamps. some of the hottest and brightest lights available at the time. These industrial monsters blasted so much concentrated heat that temperatures on set regularly skyrocketed to well over 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Actors stood under those beams in heavy period costumes, makeup, and full gear while cameras rolled take after take. It wasn't long before people started collapsing. Extras fainted mid-scene. Makeup literally melted off faces, dripping down actors' skin. Crew members had to rotate in and out of the hot zones just to keep production moving without someone dying. One cameraman later said it felt like standing directly in front of the sun. The irony is brutal. The Martians never actually touched a single actor in the story, but the movie magic designed to simulate their weapons nearly wiped out the cast and crew for real. They survived an alien invasion on screen while barely surviving the production itself. Number 5. Censorship almost gutted the violence. The 1950s were not exactly friendly to movies that pushed boundaries. When Paramount submitted War of the Worlds to the censors, they nearly had a collective meltdown. Exploding cities, burning bodies, screaming crowds being vaporized. Panic and chaos on a scale most audiences had never seen. For family-friendly 1953, it was considered way too intense. Some officials demanded the studio tone down the devastation, especially scenes showing panicked civilians being fried by Martian heat rays. Paramount fought back hard. They argued that the destruction was the entire point of the story. This wasn't a polite alien visit, it was the end of the world. Humanity facing extinction. If they sanitized the violence, they'd be left with nothing. In the end, a few shots were trimmed to satisfy the censors, but the film kept its terrifying edge. Critics later called it one of the most intense and unsettling sci-fi movies of its era. The battle with censorship nearly neutered the film, but Paramount held the line just enough to preserve what made War of the Worlds genuinely frightening. Number 6. The alien blood came straight from a butcher shop. When the filmmakers needed Martian blood for certain scenes, they didn't turn to some futuristic Hollywood lab with chemicals and dyes. They went to the local butcher. The alien fluid splattered across the screen was nothing more than dyed animal organs and real blood pulled straight from a slaughterhouse. The effects team mixed in green food coloring to give it that otherworldly, non-human vibe, then carefully filmed the mess under harsh lighting so it would glisten and ooze convincingly. Audiences gasped in horror. They thought they were looking at something truly alien and disturbing. But if they'd known the truth, that it was basically butcher shop leftovers dressed up with dye, the reaction might have been less sci-fi shock and more, "You're kidding me." It's a perfect example of how practical effects in the 50s relied on creativity and resourcefulness more than technology. You didn't need a lab. You needed a good relationship with your local meat supplier. Number 7. The sound of the Martians came from tortured animals. The filmmakers wanted the Martians to sound absolutely terrifying, something inhuman and unsettling that would burrow into your brain and refuse to leave. But back in 1953, there were no digital effects or fancy synthesizers to create alien voices. The sound team had to get creative, layering together whatever they could find. Animal cries, scraping metal, electronically distorted recordings twisted until they formed something unrecognizable. Rumor has it they even used distorted recordings of a tortured pig to get that gut-wrenching, visceral effect. The result was a sound so alien and unnatural that audiences literally squirmed in their seats. It was unforgettable, disturbing in a way that felt primal. You didn't just hear the Martians, you felt them. That eerie, high-pitched shriek became the voice of extraterrestrial menace, proving you don't need advanced technology to create nightmares. Sometimes all you need is imagination and a willingness to push ethical boundaries in the name of art. Number 8. The heat ray sound was discovered completely by accident. The Martian heat ray had to sound like nothing on Earth, deadly, alien, and unforgettable, but no one could agree on what death by futuristic laser weapons should actually sound like. The sound team tried everything. Whooshes, pops, explosions, crackling electricity. Everything felt too familiar, too terrestrial. They were stuck. Then, in a stroke of pure luck, an engineer stumbled across something bizarre while messing around in the studio. He struck an electric guitar string with a metal object, recorded it, then played the sound backward through an echo chamber. Add in some electronic distortion, and suddenly they had it. That piercing, otherworldly zap that audiences would never forget. It wasn't just a sound effect. It became a sonic trademark of alien destruction. Decades later, it's still one of the most iconic and recognizable sound cues in sci-fi history. And it only exists because someone was experimenting, got lucky, and created something that shouldn't have worked, but absolutely did. Number 9. The cast clashed behind the scenes. On screen, humanity was united against an overwhelming alien invasion. Off-screen, not so much. The main cast didn't always get along, and tension simmered under the surface during long, exhausting shoots. Anne Robinson, who played Sylvia, later admitted she struggled with co-star Gene Barry's intensity and work style. Barry was known for being incredibly meticulous, sometimes obsessively so. He'd demand retake after retake, slowing filming to a frustrating crawl. Crew members whispered about the two trading sharp comments between takes, though they always managed to pull it together once cameras rolled. It wasn't a full-blown Hollywood feud. Nobody threw punches or stormed off set permanently. But the friction was real, adding another layer of stress to an already brutal production. When you're exhausted, overheated, and working under impossible conditions, personality clashes become inevitable. The miracle is that they held it together long enough to finish the film. Number 10. Director Byron Haskin nearly had a complete breakdown. Guiding War of the Worlds was no easy ride for Byron Haskin. He'd been a respected special effects artist before transitioning into directing, but this film pushed him harder than anything he'd ever tackled. Every single day brought a new disaster. Wires showing up on film, sensors breathing down his neck, actors fainting under brutal heat lamps, studio executives demanding faster progress while the budget spiraled out of control. Haskin was caught between creative ambition and constant crisis management. At one point, insiders claimed he nearly walked off the project entirely, completely exhausted by the relentless pressure and chaos. But somehow he stuck it out. He kept the production on track even when it looked like the entire film might collapse under its own weight. By the time shooting wrapped, Haskin looked more like a man who'd survived an actual alien invasion than someone who had merely directed one. The toll was obvious. The breakdown never fully came, but it was close. Terrifyingly close. Number 11. A set accident nearly turned fatal. Big sci-fi effects in the 1950s meant big risks. Safety protocols weren't what they are today. During one climactic sequence, rigged explosions were carefully timed to detonate as actors ran for cover. The timing was supposed to be precise. Fireballs would erupt just after the cast cleared the danger zone. Controlled chaos. But something went catastrophically wrong. One of the charges detonated early, sending a massive blast of heat and debris frighteningly close to the actors. Crew members dove for cover. A cameraman later swore he felt his eyebrows singe off from the heat. For one horrifying moment, everyone on set thought they'd just witnessed a fatal accident. Luckily, miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. But the scare rattled the entire production. From that point forward, explosions were double-checked, triple-checked, and rehearsed with almost military precision. One mistake had nearly killed people. They couldn't afford another. Number 12. The first Martian designs were laughably bad. Everyone remembers the Martians as slimy, glowing creatures with disturbing three-fingered hands that looked genuinely unsettling and alien. But the early concept designs? They were downright goofy. The first prototype showed them as little more than oversized, bug-eyed puppets with floppy, cartoonish limbs. When the design team tested these prototypes on set, the crew couldn't stop laughing. Instead of terrifying, they looked like children's toys, like something from a bad puppet show. The effect killed the mood instantly. Any sense of menace or dread evaporated the moment those ridiculous puppets appeared. Realizing disaster was imminent, the design team scrapped everything and started completely over. They eventually settled on the more menacing clawed creatures with pulsating bodies we see in the final cut. Eerie enough to haunt audiences, yet mysterious enough to keep most of the terror hidden in shadows and suggestion. It was a last-minute save that transformed potential embarrassment into genuine nightmare fuel. Number 13. Woody Woodpecker is hidden in the movie. Here's a fun one. George Pal, the film's producer, was close friends with Walter Lantz, the creator of Woody Woodpecker. The two had bonded years earlier when Pal fled Europe ahead of World War II and arrived in Hollywood. As a tribute to that friendship, and maybe for good luck, Pal always tried to sneak Woody Woodpecker into his productions somehow. In War of the Worlds, if you watch very carefully during the scene where the first large Martian meteorite crashes through the sky at the beginning of the film, you can spot a tiny figure of Woody Woodpecker perched in the branches of a tree, center screen. It's easy to miss. Blink and it's gone, but it's there. A small Easter egg celebrating friendship and tradition hidden inside an alien invasion epic. Pal never forgot where he came from or who helped him along the way. Woody Woodpecker became his lucky charm, appearing in film after film as a quiet reminder of loyalty. Number 14. Cecil B. DeMille. Almost directed it, and so did Hitchcock. War of the Worlds had a long, complicated journey to the screen. Legendary filmmaker Cecil B. DeMille, at the time one of the biggest directors in Hollywood, secured the film rights all the way back in 1925. He planned to set the story in the novel's original time period of 1898 and wanted to use stop-motion animation for the Martian tripods. It would have been a completely different film, but DeMille ultimately abandoned the project for reasons lost to history. Years later, in 1931, Alfred Hitchcock expressed serious interest in adapting the story. Hitchcock directing an alien invasion epic? That would have been wild, but for whatever reason, that version never materialized either. By the time George Pal finally brought the project to life in the 50s, the story had been passed around Hollywood for nearly 3 decades. When production began, Pal wanted DeMille to narrate the film as a way of acknowledging his role in keeping the rights alive. DeMille graciously suggested Sir Cedric Hardwicke instead, and Pal honored DeMille by listing his film Samson and Delilah on a theater marquee early in War of the Worlds. Number 15. A stuntman was severely burned during filming. In one intense sequence, a stuntman was supposed to portray a soldier catching fire from a Martian heat ray. It should have been controlled, carefully choreographed, but the flames got out of control. What was supposed to be a quick, safe effect turned into a genuine emergency. The stuntman was badly burned before the crew could intervene and put out the fire. It was a terrifying reminder of how dangerous practical effects could be in an era before modern safety standards. That same sequence also included the disintegration of Colonel Hefner, which required an astonishing 144 individual matte paintings to create the effect of a human body dissolving into ash. The technical achievement was remarkable, but it came at a real human cost. The burned stuntman recovered, but the incident cast a shadow over the production. Every explosion, every fire effect after that carried extra weight. Nobody wanted another accident. Number 16. 70% of the budget went to special effects. War of the Worlds had a production budget of about $2 million. Serious money for 1953. But here's the shocking part. More than half of it, around $1.4 million, went straight into special effects. Miniature cities had to be painstakingly built and then spectacularly destroyed. Martian war machines had to be wired, lit, and suspended. Explosions had to be timed to the second. Alien creatures had to be designed and animated. It was a non-stop drain on resources. For context, most big studio dramas at the time cost less than $1 million total. War of the Worlds spent more on effects alone than entire films cost from start to finish. The gamble was enormous. If the effects didn't work, if audiences rejected them, the studio would lose everything. But the gamble paid off spectacularly. The Oscar-winning visuals turned a pulp invasion story into a landmark of cinematic spectacle. It proved that investing in groundbreaking effects could elevate genre films into something truly special. Number 17. The UK thought it was way too scary. When War of the Worlds crossed the Atlantic to British theaters, censors were absolutely horrified. Exploding cities, panicked crowds, bodies turned to ash. For 1953 audiences, especially in the more conservative UK, it was considered dangerously intense. The film was immediately slapped with an X certificate, which at the time meant it was restricted to adults only. No one under 16 could see it. Imagine that, a science fiction adventure film being treated like a horror movie. Local councils pushed back, arguing the rating was unfairly harsh, but the ruling stuck. For years, War of the Worlds was barred from younger audiences across the UK. It wasn't until much later, after the film's reputation as a sci-fi classic was firmly established, that the rating was gradually relaxed. In 1961, Paramount tried to get it reduced to an A rating, allowing under 16s if accompanied by adults. Rejected. It took until 1981 for that downgrade to finally happen. By 1986, when it hit VHS, it was rated PG. From X to PG is an incredibly rare journey for any film. Number 18. The original war machines were melted down for scrap. The copper war machine models are unforgettable icons of 50s sci-fi. But their story didn't end with the credits. Director Byron Haskin actually reused the same prop designs in his 1964 film Robinson Crusoe on Mars. If you watch closely, the alien ships look suspiciously familiar because they literally were the same models, recycled for another production. But here's the tragic twist. Only a handful of the original models survived at all. Several of the copper-made war machines were reportedly melted down for scrap metal in the years after filming wrapped. Hollywood treated them like disposable junk instead of preserving them as pieces of cinema history. Today, collectors would pay absolute fortunes to own one of those original props. But most are gone forever, dissolved into raw materials. It's a strange and sad fate. Iconic Martian invaders reduced to scrap metal while their legend lived on in science fiction cinema. Number 19. Invisible wires became visible over time. The original Technicolor 3-strip prints of War of the Worlds looked absolutely stunning. The color was vibrant, the lighting was perfect, and most importantly, the wires suspending the Martian war machines were completely invisible. The filmmakers knew exactly what would and wouldn't show up on that specific film stock. They didn't waste time hiding details audiences would never see. But in the late 1960s, everything changed. The industry shifted to Eastman color stock, which was easier to use and far less expensive. The problem? Different film stock meant different visual properties. Those wires that had been invisible for 15 years suddenly became obvious. By the time TV reruns hit in the 70s and 80s, audiences were laughing at the floating toys on strings instead of cowering from alien invaders. Critics mistakenly assumed the effects had always been cheap and poorly made. It wasn't until the 2018 4K restoration that technicians finally fixed the problem. By going back to the original 3-strip Technicolor negatives and digitally painting out wire reflections, they restored the war machines to their original terrifying glory. The aliens didn't just invade Earth. They accidentally exposed one of Hollywood's trickiest technical challenges across multiple decades of film technology. Number 20. The flying wing was real and both of them crashed. The Northrop YB-49 flying wing depicted in the movie, the experimental bomber sent to drop an atomic bomb on the Martians, wasn't a fantasy aircraft. It was absolutely real. Two were actually built, and both of them crashed. The footage used in War of the Worlds was real stock film from Northrop Aircraft's promotional documentary called The Story of the Flying Wing. The first YB-49 was destroyed during a high-speed taxi test. The second crashed in June 1948. Its debris field still exists somewhere in California's Antelope Valley. A third variant, the YRB-49, was deliberately destroyed by the U.S. Air Force in 1953, the same year War of the Worlds was released. By the time audiences watched that flying wing soar across theater screens, the actual aircraft no longer existed. The film preserved the image of a revolutionary plane that had been wiped from reality. It's a haunting bit of meta-commentary. A movie about extinction featuring a machine that had already gone extinct. From filming the entire movie illegally to roasting actors under lights hot enough to melt makeup, from Martian designs that looked like toys to war machines that were literally melted for scrap, War of the Worlds was absolute chaos from start to finish. Every day brought a new crisis. Every scene courted disaster. And yet somehow, out of all that chaos, stress, near-death accidents, and last-minute saves, it became one of the most influential science fiction films ever made. It didn't just scare audiences in 1953. It set the template for every alien invasion blockbuster that followed. The DNA of War of the Worlds lives in Independence Day, Mars Attacks, even modern takes like Arrival. It proved that practical effects, creative problem-solving, and sheer determination could overcome impossible odds. The film that almost destroyed itself ended up defining a genre. So what fact shocked you the most? Was it the butcher shop alien blood? The illegal filming? Those laughable early Martian puppets? Or maybe the war machines that were treated like garbage and melted down? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more untold stories from behind the movies you thought you knew. Because sometimes the real invasion happens behind the camera.